Just tie now. Just think about it. Combine your mind with your heart. Connect all those three circles and let whatever come out. Just come on out. We got a story today about Atlantis. I was listening to the radio and I had to share this story with y'all. It's by Patty Paul, and she wrote a book about different lifetimes and absorbing different lifetimes. I recorded this on last month on the 26th, so about a month ago from this upload date. Yeah, May 26th is when it was uploaded. So she talks about Atlantis and talk to other people and the connections that she has to the history of not just one Atlantis, but a second Atlantis and the connection to the times of now. So let's just just think about the things she has to say. Let me know what you tie on this in the comments below. Now, don't forget to check out www.justtinow.com. Tie always.
I believe that is true for others, but speaking just for myself. Now, you spoke about proof. All I can say is the proof I have is in the results that I get from doing this work and from taking responsibility. My life at the age of 85 is happier, freer. I'm having more fun than ever, Nancy. And so I've had so many more successes. I have so much more love in my life. So that's my proof to myself that it's working.
My guest is Patty Paul, and her latest book is Exploring Other Times. And what you just said reminds me that often we ask an older person, usually a lot older than you even, well, what's the secret to your long life? What's the secret to your success? And so that's really what you're telling us in this book. Here's how I have come to lead a happy life, if I want to just use that one adjective. But you also take us back in chapter 1 to when this all started. And you call this chapter A New Adventure. And this was a summer morning of 1985. And what happened that day, Patty?
This was a pivotal moment, a pivotal day in my life. It was a Sunday, so I wasn't at work, and I was just having a nice cup of coffee in my condominium in Huntington Beach, where I still live. And I decided to do some housework. One thing I mentioned in the first chapter is on this beautiful day of being off work, I could have done anything I wanted. And what I did was change my life. So I started doing some housework. And as I was doing this housework, I was thinking about different things. I had recently gotten a divorce from husband number 3, and I had had a number of other relationships and a couple of other marriages, and I started thinking about it. And to make a long story short, I realized as I was working around the house how different these men were in so many ways, younger, older. Their educations were different, their careers were different, and I was thinking, this is really odd. And then it dawned on me, and I was thinking of other problems that I'd had earlier in my life, and it dawned on me that I wanted to find out more about myself. So I sat on my couch, and I spent about 2 hours just going back to my childhood, how unloved I felt, and I learned to be independent as a very young age, at about 4.5 years old. But I always felt my mother didn't love me, so I had a lot of insecurities. At any rate, after a couple of hours of this self-examination, it dawned on me the one thing that was in common with all these relationships I'd had was me. And I realized that if my life was going to change, I would have to change. And also, at the same time, by this time my kids were young adults and living on their own, I realized that I wanted to learn more about my own spiritual nature. As a kid, I just did not relate to that Father God who always seemed so angry, and I just knew there was another God for me. And so I'd always been interested in metaphysics. So when I made that second choice to explore my spiritual nature and learn more about that, I knew it would be through metaphysics. Nancy, my whole life changed direction. Within days, information and books and things started flowing to me.
Well, one of those books I might mention, I remember at the time, this was shortly after Shirley MacLaine's book, Out on a Limb, came out. And so that was one of those books, apparently.
Absolutely. Yes, that was. And I had read other earlier books by Shirley MacLaine, but I just heard about this one, and it had been written, I think, 3 years before. Anyway, so something told me I needed to read that book. And the one thing that rang my chimes when I read that book was Shirley MacLaine wrote about attending a session or a gathering where a channeled being was sharing their wisdom. Now, I had no idea such things were happening, but something about that, I just knew I had to hear a channel being sharing their wisdom. Had no idea how that was going to come about, but I just knew that's what I needed to do. And then in my chapter 1, I spoke about, I got out of the blue an idea to visit my friend Barbara, who I'd known since 3rd grade, living in Colorado, and just to visit her for the weekend because I couldn't afford to take time off from work. And I went to Barbara's. She picked me up at the Denver airport, and I mentioned that I had read MacLaine's book, and I was just struck by the idea of a channel being sharing their wisdom. And Barbara happened to mention that she had these 2 videos at home that were videos of a being by the name of Ramtha. Would I like to listen to those? And yes, I did. And again, to make a long story a bit shorter, eventually I was made aware of a video by a being named Lazarus, a channeled being, a very wise channeled being, channeled by Jack Purcell. And the bookstore where I rented videos suggested that I might want to watch this one. And when I did, I just knew this being, this wise being, whose basic premise for all of us was we each create our own reality, no ifs, ands, or buts. I just knew this one would be the source of information that would help me grow and change as a human being and a spiritual being.
My guest is Patty Paul, and her latest book is Exploring Other Lifetimes, a memoir of a soul's journey. And in this book, she has stories of lifetimes in Lemuria, ancient Greece, old Europe, and Atlantis, all related to her present life. Now, this is on the cover. You mentioned Lemuria and Atlantis.
Yes.
And these are places that we've heard of, but we don't know a lot about them. And some people think, oh, well, yeah. So what did you learn about, let's start with Atlantis, because Lemuria, just in my own view, is a little more pleasant. It's just, if I want to use the word scary. So tell us what you know about Atlantis, Patty.
Well, first let me say my source of information, as I implied a few minutes ago, my source was or were from channeled beings, non-physical channeled beings, all of whom support the premise that each one of us creates our own reality, which is empowering and which resonated with me. And so
might I interject here? Patty, you had a guest on your TV talk show who was a channeled being. That's how you label him all.
Exactly.
And he said he referred to himself as an energy essence. He said he's not a who. If you ask, well, who are you? He didn't say he was a who. He said he was a what. And he referred to himself as this channel being as an energy essence. So you might elaborate on what you found a channeled being was for people who may not be familiar with that term.
Yes. Gosh. Okay. I had many channeled beings as guests on my TV talk show, which aired in Southern California for 10 years. I'm not sure which one you refer to. Let's see, a channeled being, the ones that I trust, the ones whose information is of value to me, happen to have never been physical. And they are channeled also by friends of mine, fellow metaphysicians, whom I know also support we each create our own reality. So I'm careful
and
about...
And you often use the adjective wise in front of these.
Yes, I do. Wise, because each time in my book, when I refer to a being, a channeled being who has given me information or insights, I think it would be tedious if I explained every single time who they were, who channeled them. And so I make a note in my book that when I mention wise being, that means a channeled being. And in my acknowledgments section at the front of my book, I write out who the channeled beings are and the human beings who channeled them. Now, getting back to this reference you made about one of the beings, I don't recall exactly which one who mentioned energy. There are different ways of describing who they are and who we are. In a sense, I don't mean to throw the curve here, but in a sense, each one of us is basically a collection of energies, vibrational frequencies. And the channeled beings, therefore, the ones I trust and communicate with, they never refer to themselves as I, because they know they are multidimensional, multifaceted, and so they refer to themselves as we. The one you mentioned, if they mention that they are energies, is that what you said?
An energy essence.
Yes. Okay. Well, that again is one way of saying it. I would extrapolate that out to each one of us is an entity, our own unique entity. We are a being. When we're in our body, we're a physical being. When we die, 1 minute later, we're a non-physical. It's simply a transformation, but we are a collection of energies. And I'm talking about emotions. Energy in motion. And that's not just a little play on words.
After a short break, I'll be back with my guest, author and TV host Patty Paul, who has written a book, a memoir, exploring other lifetimes. What did you say in your book about the second civilization of Atlantis?
Well, after the first continent of Atlantis was destroyed as it was, as it had been, it was broken up into three major large islands, large bodies of land. And one of those had the main civilization of society, the capital city of Atlantis on it. And the other two islands had, these were large bodies of land that were left after the destruction of the first continent of Atlantis. And so it was like almost a new start for that second civilization starting off.
You say the downfall of this second Atlantean civilization was brought about by political corruption and by seeking and holding on to power for its own sake.
Yes.
The despotic and corrupt government was held together, and this is, now we're talking about the second Atlantean civilization, held together by martial law, and martial law was used to maintain the level of mediocrity that prevailed.
Yes.
Graft paid to allow development of lands lying over earthquake fault lines helped to set up the conditions for destruction. So the combination of governmental ineptitude, corruption, and martial law was manifested outwardly as natural disasters, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, fires, tidal waves that caused the destruction of the second civilization of Atlantis. And that was, you say, around 28,200 BC.
Yeah.
But now in that case, you tell us that a few survived, and those who did escaped in boats and rafts that were carried along by ocean currents to other lands where they formed small pockets of civilization. There are places in the world today whose descendants are Atlanteans?
Yes. Those survivors managed to go to different parts of the world, as I mentioned. Some made their way down to Central America. The Mayan culture in that area arose from the ancient Atlanteans. Down in Peru, some of the Atlanteans made their way to that area in Peru, and the Inca cultures and civilizations arose. In fact, in Peru, I don't mention this in my book, but there are certain interesting patterns, almost geometric patterns, that can only be seen from high up in the air. And
Nazca lines. Nazca lines.
Is that what they are? Yeah.
Yeah, because I lived in Peru, and I saw these various things that you talk about, the way the Incas built their constructions, and it does, I have to say, it lends credence to what you are just saying now.
Yes. The as I mentioned, some of the Atlanteans who were departing, because some of them were prescient enough to know that the destruction was coming. There were a lot of metaphysicians living at that time, and they knew. And so they would leave in their flying balloons, and so they were able to, see from the air. And also, I mentioned that some of the survivors went up into the, what would be now the Nordic lands, Norway, Sweden, Iceland, up there.
Let remind listeners, my guest is Patty Paul, and she is telling us about her recent book, Exploring Other Lifetimes, Memoir of a Soul's Journey. And we've talked about the fact that you got to know Atlantis, and it's not exactly a role model of how we want to live our lives now. But what about Lemuria, this other continent? What did you learn about your lifetimes there?
Yes, Lemuria arose from the Pacific Ocean area around 70,000 BC. And I go into explicit detail of the reason for the emergence of Lemuria. Essentially, it was to provide a space for the gentler, kinder energies the feminine energies, the divine feminine energies, the goddess energies, to be brought forth on this beautiful blue planet Earth. Prior to that time, some very damaging forces were doing horrible experiments with animals and human beings. And so anyway, the continent of Atlantis, Lemuria, was created to bring in these gentler, loving energies, compassionate energies, to counterbalance the negativity that was taking place. And this beautiful land of Lemuria arose from the myths, and I go into detail about the different areas of Lemuria and how each one of them, what they were for. There was a farmland, there were high mountainous areas where they had forests, and in the center of Lemuria, which the center was kind of protected by cliffs, and in the center of Lemuria was a tropical jungle, out of which rose high buttes, high mesas, shall we say, pillars of land that rose, and on top of those high pillars of land were built cities that were made for teaching and healing and higher levels of pursuit, spiritual growth.
Well, before we conclude the discussion of your book, the way that you accessed this information was to go into a meditation. And I think even if listeners say, Patty, all this stuff's a little too much. But I do think these days, meditation has become more and more a viable resource for people, particularly this past year. And different techniques work for different people. So would you please describe what meditation technique worked for you?
Sure, I will. And I will say that in my book, after the last chapter of my book is chapter 23, and then I have a section where I do describe in detail my personal meditation technique and also a blending technique, which basically relax beforehand, relax your body. There's different ways of doing that, but the abbreviated version would be to breathe a few times deeply and exhale, and then to breathe naturally, peacefully, and then to begin to count oneself down from 7, slowly down, down, down through one's subconscious, down into the unconscious. And at the number 1, I sense myself in my safe place. And as far as calling upon my unseen friends and my unknown presence to help me and guide me, I do that all day long, especially if I have a challenging something or something I do want some guidance and help with. Guidance and help throughout my day. And yes, it's very effective to do for the meditation and to set my intention, especially as relates to these lifetimes I visited. If I knew there was a lifetime I wanted to visit, I would set that intention. I want to visit the lifetime where I once was a writer, for instance. Then I sense myself in my safe place, and for me, it happens to be by a beautiful blue lagoon. I open myself to my common senses, the colors. What colors do I see? What do I feel? Do I feel warm sun? What about the aromas, the salt air, the fragrance of the flowers? So I make it as real as I can until it is real for me. Then often I call forth my soul. I invite my soul to be with me And then imagine myself being embraced by my soul, and I surrender to them. I want to give up all control. I want to give up all of my expectations to just allow myself to be transported. And I sense myself being lifted and then wafting this way and that through space until I sense myself being lowered, and I sense my feet touching solid ground. And then I open my eyes, and there I am in this other lifetime or in this other locale that I wanted to visit. Sometimes I don't know where I'm going. I just ask for a lifetime or a place where I might do the work I want to do.
Well, thank you for sharing, in this case, the technique you use for your meditation to access these concurrent lifetimes. My guest has been Patty Paul. Her book is Exploring Other Lifetimes, a memoir of a soul's journey. Thank you, Patty.
Oh, you're welcome.
I would also like to thank my first guest, author Karen McHenry, who wrote a book about the tattoo.